Hello there and welcome to the first unit review video of AP Psychology. My name is Mr. Sinn and today we're going to be going over everything you need to know about AP Psychology Unit 1, Scientific Foundations of Psychology. Now before we get started, I need you to click the link in the description of this video and go get the study guide for the video. It's in my ultimate review packet. The study guide will go along with the video and help you take notes on all the important concepts that you need to know about in this video. This video is just one part of the ultimate review packet. You'll find everything you need to succeed in your AP Psychology class or an introduction to psychology class in college. The packet has unit review videos for each unit, practice quizzes, study guides, answer keys, full practice AP exams, and other resources to help you learn AP Psychology. All right, enough of that jibber jabber. Now it's time to get into AP Psychology Unit 1, Topic 1. Now this video is going to be going fast, so make sure you have your study guide out and you're following along. If you do miss anything, don't worry, I got an answer key in the ultimate review packet that'll make sure you get all the information you need. Now when we're talking about psychology, we're talking about the scientific study of the mind and behavior. We can see that there are a variety of different individuals who have made contributions to the field of psychology and helped shape the field into what it is today. Wilhelm Wundt is known as the father of psychology. He created the first laboratory that was dedicated exclusively to psychology research. Wundt studied the senses, reaction time, attention spans, emotions, and eventually one of his students, Edward Titchener, would go on to create structuralism. William James taught the first psychology course at Harvard University. He wrote the first psychology textbook and created the theoretical approach known as functionalism. He also helped get more women into psychology. One of those women was Mary Whiton Calkins. Stanley Hall became the first American to earn a PhD in psychology. He opened the first psychology lab in the United States of America and became the first president of the American Psychological Association. Mary Whiton Calkins joined William James Graduate Seminar despite pushback from the university and other students. Calkins made significant contributions in memory research and went on to become the first female president of the APA. Margaret Floy Washburn made significant contributions to animal research. She also became the first woman to earn a psychology degree and became the second female president of the APA. Charles Darwin proposed the idea of natural selection and argued that our behaviors and bodies were shaped through natural selection. This reinforced and shaped the theoretical approach known as evolutionary psychology. Dorothea Dix helped reshape the medical field by highlighting the unfair and inhumane treatment of mentally ill people and also helped to reform insane asylums. Sigmund Freud created the psychoanalytic theory, which was later changed to the psychodynamic approach. He focused on studying the unconscious mind and believed that people's personalities are shaped by unconscious motives. Ivan Pavlov focused on reflex conditioning, which would later become known as classical conditioning. He is most known for his experiment with dogs and their digestion. Jean Piaget was the first psychologist to conduct a systematic study of cognitive development. He would eventually go on to create a theory of cognitive development focusing on children. Carl Rogers is one of the founders of humanistic psychology. He made significant contributions to the research and understanding of people's personality. B.F. Skinner expanded on the theoretical approach of behavioralism. He is known for operant conditioning, which focuses on behaviors and positive and negative consequences. There is also John B. Watson, who is one of the founders of behaviorism. He believed that psychology should be a scientific study and focus on observable things. As you can see, there is a lot of different people who have shaped the field of psychology, and this list only scratches the surface. Remember, this is a unit review video. We're highlighting the main concepts that are listed in the CED. If you need a more in-depth overview of these concepts, check out my topic review videos on YouTube. They cover all the topics in depth. Now, when talking about different concepts in psychology, we can use different schools of thought to approach different topics. We can see structuralism focuses on different structures of conscious through individual parts. It uses introspection, which is the process of looking inward to observe yourself think. Functionalism, on the other hand, looks to understand our mental and behavioral processes. Here we view these structures not as individual structures, but evolved functions. Functionalists seek to understand how the different structures work together and impact each other. Gestalt psychology looks at the whole consciousness and includes the study of perception, sensation, learning, and problem solving. Here we are focusing on the organizational process instead of just the content of behavior. Psychoanalytic, also known as psychodynamic, looks at behaviors and mental processes and how they are influenced by the ego and the conflict with the id and the superego. Here the focus is on the process that come from the unconscious. Oftentimes free association will be used here, which is when an image or a word triggers another idea or word inside a person's mind. So those are some of the historical schools of thought. But remember, we also have modern perspectives as well. First is early behavioralism, which believes that behaviors are learned through experiences and are observable. This is broken down into reflexive conditioning conditioning, also known as classical conditioning, and operant conditioning. Next is humanistic, which believes humans are naturally good and seek to reach their potential through free will. The goal to life is to reach self-actualization. Sociocultural studies the impact of a person's culture, nationality, religion, gender, social norms, and other cultural impacts on a person's behavior and mental processes. Then we also have different approaches, starting with the evolutionary approach. This studies how behaviors and mental processes of today exist due to natural selection. The biological approach looks at how different structures of the brain and nervous system operate, with the goal of understanding the link between our biological and psychological processes. Lastly, we have the cognitive approach, which looks at attitudes, memories, perceptions, and expectations. All influence behaviors and mental processes for individuals. Here, the focus is on how individuals process and remember information. We can see that psychology is made up of different domains and focuses. There is the biological, the developmental, the cognitive, educational, personality, social, positive, and psychometric domain, each focus on different aspects of life. These domains can be classified as basic research, while other domains such as industrial, organizational, counseling, and clinical can be classified as applied research. Remember, basic research is research that seeks to build psychology's knowledge base, while applied research focuses on applying research and taking on practical problems. For example, counselors who seek to help individuals cope with challenges in life, like school or work. Speaking of counselors, remember that counselors are different from a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist provides psychotherapy and are medical doctors who can prescribe drugs and treat psychological disorders. All right, now for this last part of this first section of Unit 1, it deals with the different subfields of psychology. What I want you to do for this part is go through the study guide and answer the questions. Complete the table on the different scenarios. You can see that each scenario focuses on different situations. You need to identify the subfield of psychology that would handle or connect with that specific scenario. Now, in order to save you time and try to make these videos as short as possible, I'm not going to go through all 12 scenarios. Instead, I added the answers to each of the scenarios in the answer key of the Ultimate Review Packet. I also added an explanation for each of the answers. So pause this video and answer those scenario questions. Once you've paused the video and then you've also checked your answers, come back, unpause the video, and we'll continue with Section 2 of Unit 1. Now, when conducting research, psychologists will create an operational definition. This is a description for the experiment in terms of procedure, actions, or processes by which it could be observed and measured. This allows for the experiment to be replicated by others and makes sure that each of the variables in the experiment are defined and shows how it will be measured. When conducting an experiment, researchers will often use a sample of a population. Remember, a population is all of the individuals in a group that are being studied, and a sample is a selected group of people from the population. The sample group will represent the entire population in the experiment. Researchers use samples to make their studies easier to conduct, since it can be difficult to get every person in a population to participate in a study. When selecting a sample group, researchers will often use a random sample or stratified sample. Remember, random sampling is when each individual in a population has an equal chance of participating, and a stratified sample is when the population is divided into different subcategories and a random sample is taken from each subcategory. When setting up a study or experiment, researchers try to avoid sampling bias, which is when the group in the sample does not represent the population. If a researcher has a sampling bias, the results of the study may be skewed, which will prevent the results from being used in the larger population. Ideally, studies and experiments want to have a representative sample, which is when the sample group in the study represents all the different people in the population. This allows for the results of an experiment to be applied to the population as a whole. Now, when conducting a study or an experiment, we can see researchers utilize a variety of different research methods. Experiments are observations which are conducted under controlled conditions to study a relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable, which can give a researcher insight into the cause and effect, but at the same time may have skewed results if there are any biases in the experiment methodology or if there is a confounding variable that the researcher was not aware of. Correlational studies allow researchers to predict the relationship between two variables. They are great at showing the strength and direction of a relationship, but do not show cause and effect due to the third variable problem. Surveys are self-reported data from questions that often ask for an individual's opinions, thoughts, or information on what they have done. These are often cheap and are great at collecting lots of data, but may have skewed data since participants may have their answer influenced by the wording effect, or may change their answers to look better on the survey. Naturalistic observations allow researchers to observe behaviors as they happen in a real-world setting. There is no lab or staged area. This is great at getting authentic data, but if subjects are aware of the study, they may change their behaviors, which would skew the data. Case studies allow researchers to analyze different perspectives of a topic or a subject. They often provide information in chronological order. This allows rare behaviors to be observed, but the data that is collected here cannot be used to generalize the population, and the study may be impacted by the Hawthorne effect. Longitudinal studies are studies that follow one particular group over a long period of time. These studies are great at showing changes over a long period of time, but may have participants drop out of the study early due to the length of the study. Lastly, we have a cross-sectional study, which compares different groups at the same time. These are inexpensive and can be completed in a short amount of time, but these studies only provide a snapshot of a group and do not show a complete picture. All right, now before we go into Unit 3 of Topic 1, I just want to say if you're finding any value in this video, consider hitting that subscribe button and dropping a like on the video. It's free and it's a great way to support the channel. Plus, it'll make sure that you don't miss out on any future videos for any of the other units of AP Psychology. Now, once a researcher picks their sample group and what type of study or experiment they're going to do, they need to make sure that they've clearly identified their hypothesis. Remember, a hypothesis is a testable prediction, an assumption that is made before any research has been completed. This is often confused with a theory, which is a statement that is supported by data from research that has been completed and explains a question, thought, or phenomenon. Oftentimes when researchers are conducting a controlled experiment, they're trying to understand if one variable causes another variable. This is known as a causal relationship. Here we're looking at an independent variable, which is the cause, and a dependent variable, which is the effect. A controlled experiment is the only experiment that can show cause and effect. Remember, independent variable equals the cause, and the dependent variable equals the effect. For example, if a researcher was conducting an experiment on the power of numbers and social pressures on teenagers to see if their ability to perform set tasks would be influenced. During the experiment, participants would be told wrong answers and conflicting information by other teenagers. The researchers would then observe the participant to see if they had conformed to the group decision. In this example, the independent variable is the number of teenagers in the group surrounding the participant, and the dependent variable is whether the participant conforms their answer to the group of teenagers. Now, when conducting an experiment, a researcher must always be aware of the possibility of confounding variables, which are other variables besides the IV that could impact the DV. If there are other variables impacting an experiment or study, it may skew the result. This is known as the third variable problem. In order to try and minimize different biases and errors from occurring in a study or experiment, the researcher can use random assignment, which is when each participant of a study has an equal chance of being put into the control group or experimental group. Remember, this is different from random sample, which is when each person in the population has an equal chance of being chosen for the study. Researchers can also use a single blind study, which is when participants in an experiment are unaware of which group in the experiment they're part of. Or they could use a double blind study, which is when the participant and the researcher conducting the experiment are unaware of which group the participants are in. By using a single blind study or a double blind study, researchers can minimize the placebo effect, which is when participants may act differently in a study or experiment because they expect a certain outcome from a study, experiment, or an independent variable. Now, I mentioned a control group and an experimental group. The control group is also known as the placebo group. This group is given a placebo, which is a substance that is as close as possible to the independent variable, but it's missing a key component of the independent variable, while the experimental group is the group who receives the independent variable. One last concept that I want to touch on before we move into Section 4 of Unit 1, which is selecting a research method, is quasi-experiments. Remember, quasi-experiments are used in situations where controlled experiments would be impossible to use or would be unethical to do. These experiments do not include random assignment of participants. For example, if I want to conduct a study on underage drinking, I could not randomly assign participants to the control or experimental group. So we've been talking a lot about different experiments and studies, and 1.4 is going to continue that conversation. When conducting a study or an experiment, researchers want to make sure that their study has both reliability and validity. Reliability refers to the repeatability of a test or study, while validity is how well a test measures what it claims to measure. In order to do this, researchers can utilize different methods to create more accurate studies and reduce bias in those studies. Two ways they can do this is by using a double-blind study or a single-blind study. Both of these different ways of approaching a study we've already talked about in this Unit 1 video. By using a single-blind study or a double-blind study, it prevents participants from having their own biases based on what group they're in impact the study. And a double-blind study makes sure that the researcher who's conducting the experiment also does not treat the subjects any differently, based on the group that they are in. Now, speaking of biases, you'll want to be familiar with a couple of different types of biases and understand how they can be prevented. Hindsight bias is the tendency to think that one could have anticipated the outcome of an event or experiment after it already occurred. This can be prevented by using pre-assessments and also by using the scientific method. False consensus effect is when individuals overestimate how many others share their opinions and ideas. To prevent this, researchers should utilize the scientific method and also present participants with alternate viewpoints. Confirmation bias is when individuals focus on only specific information that aligns with their viewpoint and ignore conflicting information. To prevent this, researchers should be aware of their own biases before the study and make sure their experiments can be replicated so others can test their findings. Experimenter or researcher bias is when researchers unknowingly influence the outcome of the research. This can be prevented by using a double-blind study or also by having clear operational definitions set so the study can be replicated by others. Social desirability or participant bias is when participants in a study skew their answers to create a more favorable impression of themselves. This can be countered by keeping the identity of the participants hidden, or researchers can also use placebos or hide the hypothesis from the participants. Lastly, there's the Hawthorne effect, which is when an individual or a participant alters their behavior because they know that they are being observed. This can be prevented by using random assignment, placebos, or by using a double-blind or single-blind study. Now, Section 5 of Unit 1 is all about math and statistical analysis, and I know I can already hear you saying, this is my favorite, this is why I took psychology, it's because of math. Yeah, so just get ready for that. Now, once researchers have completed their study or experiment, they need to be able to understand the data that was collected. Oftentimes, when talking about data, we are looking at quantitative data and qualitative data. And when trying to organize and determine the significance of the data, researchers use descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. Quantitative and qualitative data is looking at the type of data that was collected. Quantitative data is numbers, facts, items that are not up for interpretation, while qualitative data is often in word form and is up for interpretation. On the other hand, researchers use descriptive statistics to organize and describe data that was collected, and they use inferential statistics to make predictions about their data to better determine if the data from a sample can be applied to the population. Now, before we go into statistical significance and inferential statistics, pause this video and identify the different graphic organizers that are used to display data in your study guide. It'll be important that you understand how to read these organizers and also understand how they show data. Once you're done, check your answers in the answer key in the ultimate review packet. Now, when looking at the results of an experiment, we can look at different indicators to figure out the significance of the data. Researchers can look at the probability value to see how statistically significant the data is. If the p-value is at or below 0.05, then there's less than a 5% chance that the results were due to chance, meaning that the data most likely is statistically significant. But if, let's say, our p-value is 0.80, that means there's an 80% chance that the results were due to chance, meaning the results of our experiment would not be statistically significant. Researchers can break down the data with central tendency, which consists of the mean, median, and mode. The mean is the average of the data set. To find this, you would take the sum of all your values and then divide by the amount of values you added together. To find the mode, you would look for the value that occurs most often. Whichever value occurs the most is the mode. Lastly, for the median, you want to find the score that is in the exact middle of the data set. To find the median, you need to organize your data in order from smallest to largest. If you have an odd number of values, you take the value that's in the middle. And if you have an even amount of values, then you add up the two values that are in the middle and divide by 2. Now, if researchers want to see how dispersed the data is, they'll need to look at the measures of variability with range and standard deviation. To calculate the range, you need to take the highest value point and the lowest value point and subtract them. The range is just the difference between the 2 points. Standard deviation, on the other hand, allows researchers to indicate the average distance from the mean for a data set. For AP Psychology, you don't have to worry about having to calculate the standard deviation. When looking at the standard deviation, we can see a couple different distributions occur. Sometimes we might have a normal distribution. This takes the shape of a symmetrical bell-shaped curve. Here we have just one mode, and the mean and median and mode are located at the center of the distribution, at the 0-point value. A normal distribution is not the most common frequency distribution. It's much more common that data will have a positive skew or negative skew. A positive skew occurs when scores are low and are clustered to the left of the mean, while a negative skew has high scores that are clustered on the right of the mean. You also might see a bimodal distribution, which is when the distribution has two modes, causing the distribution to have two peaks. Now, if we look at a normal distribution, we can see that we have a positive and negative z-score. Positive z-scores are higher than the mean, and a negative z-score indicates that the score is lower than the mean. Z-scores allow us to compare things that are not the same as long as they are normally distributed. We can also look at the percentile rank. This allows us to understand understand the percentage of scores that are at or below a particular score. This is what tells us the percentage of the population that has a score or a value that's the same or lower than our score. For example, when looking at the percentile rank, remember that the median is the 50th percentile. This has half the data above and half the data below the mean. So if you're in the 80th percentile for height, that means that 80% of the people your age have heights that are less than or equal to yours. Changing gears to look at the correlational studies, we can see that if researchers are analyzing the results of a correlational study, they'll need to understand the correlation coefficient. The closer this value is to 1, whether it be positive or negative, the stronger the relationship is between the two variables. If the correlation coefficient is between 0 and 1, that means the variables are either increasing or decreasing together. If we plot the data on a scatter plot, we can see a positive relationship. If a correlational coefficient is between 0 and -1, it means one variable increases while the other decreases. Here we have an inverse relationship. If we plot the data on a scatter plot, it's a negative relationship. If there is no correlation, it means there is no relationship between the variables, and the plotted data points would be all over the place. All right, now we're almost done. We're down to the last standard. Again, if you found any value in this video, consider subscribing or becoming a channel member. It's a great way to make sure that you don't miss out on any future videos, and it also helps support the channel so I can keep making more videos in the future. The last part of this unit is ethical guidelines. In order to make sure that everyone who is involved in a study or an experiment is protected, the American Psychological Association has created ethical guidelines in psychology. The APA acts as a governing board in studying behavior, creating a set of ethical principles and a code of conduct to ensure that ethical standards in psychology are enforced. There's also the Institutional Review Board that makes sure that studies and experiments in colleges and universities are set up in a way that protect everyone involved in the study. In order to get a study approved by the IRB, researchers must make sure that the research is not unnecessarily risky. They also need to check to make sure that participants have adequate protection. Participants must also have privacy and confidentiality in the study. And lastly, participants must have also given informed consent. Remember, informed consent can be given when the participants of a study have been given adequate information about the study and can make a rational decision on whether or not they want to participate in the study. In order to make sure that an experiment protects individuals in the experiment must have informed consent, provide a trustworthy environment, and not take on any unnecessary risks, and take precautions to prevent physical and psychological harm to individuals. Experiments such as the Stanford prison experiment failed to protect participants due to not taking adequate measures to prevent physical and psychological harm, which could have been avoided if the researchers did not play a double role in the experiment, enforce rules that protected individuals in the experiment, or if the experiment had oversight from another researcher. Lastly, we can see that it's not just people that need protection in studies, but animals as well. The IACUC is responsible for overseeing the protection of animals in studies across the country. Woohoo! Congrats! You just completed Unit 1 of AP Psychology. Now what you need to do is go back to the Ultimate Review Packet and check the answers to the study guide. Make sure you have all the correct answers, and also make sure once you're done with that to go take the unit practice quiz. That way you can make sure you're understanding all the different concepts in this unit. Remember, the packet has videos, study guides, practice quizzes, 2 full practice AP exams, and much more on all the units of AP Psychology. It's a great resource that'll help you get an A in your class and a 5 on the national exam. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Mr. Sinn, and I'll see you next time online for Unit 2 of AP Psychology.